The Epicurean Paradox has loomed over theological debates for centuries, a challenge so profound that many religious institutions seem to have intentionally buried it. Epicurus, a Greek philosopher from 341 to 270 BCE, dared to question the nature of God in a way that shook the foundations of belief. His argument was simple, yet devastating. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, why does evil exist? The implications of this question have reverberated through history, often suppressed or ignored by those who stand to lose the most from its answers. In the ancient world, such questions sparked intense debate, but by the time Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, these ideas were no longer just philosophical exercises, they were dangerous. In 529 CE, Emperor Justinian I ordered the closure of the School of Athens, a move many historians see as a deliberate attempt to silence the voices questioning the new orthodoxy. This marked the beginning of a long era in which such challenges to divine omnipotence were treated as heretical. Could this suppression have been driven by fear that the paradox, if widely known, would undermine the legitimacy of religious authority? One of the most common attempts to address the paradox came from Augustine of Hippo, who argued that evil exists because of human free will, not because of God's negligence or malevolence. Yet this explanation raised as many questions as it answered. What about natural disasters, diseases, or tragedies that seem to have no connection to human choice? Why would a benevolent deity allow suffering that serves no apparent purpose? During the Enlightenment, philosophers like David Hume revisited Epicurus as paradox, rephrasing the argument to expose its logical contradictions. Hume's writings reignited the debate, yet the response from religious institutions was often silence or condemnation. By labeling these thinkers as atheists or heretics, the Church sidestepped the need to provide meaningful answers, leaving the paradox unresolved. This avoidance hints at a deeper insecurity. What if the paradox truly has no resolution within the framework of traditional theology? In modern times, theologians have continued to grapple with the problem of evil, offering theories such as the soul-making argument, which suggests that suffering is necessary for spiritual growth. However, this explanation falters in the face of gratuitous suffering, like the death of innocents or catastrophic natural events. These instances of seemingly purposeless evil defy attempts to reconcile them with the idea of a just and loving deity. More unsettling are theories that suggest the presence of evil is not an oversight, but an integral part of a divine plan. Some fringe thinkers propose that suffering serves as a form of cosmic testing or even energy manipulation, a chilling prospect that reframes the paradox as a feature rather than a flaw. Could this idea hint at an agenda far more complex and sinister than previously imagined? The Epicurean Paradox forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of belief and the structures built upon it. If these questions remain unanswered, does it mean that God does not exist, or does it reveal that our understanding of God is incomplete? For centuries, religious institutions have thrived on certainty, offering a framework of meaning to countless lives. To challenge that certainty is to threaten the very foundation of these systems, which might explain why the paradox has so often been suppressed or dismissed. The Omnipotence Paradox strikes at the heart of one of theology's most sacred concepts, the idea of an all-powerful God. For centuries, this logical trap has left scholars and theologians scratching their heads, unable to reconcile the inherent contradictions. The paradox is deceptively simple yet devastatingly profound. If God is truly omnipotent, the power to do absolutely anything should include the ability to create a rock so heavy that he cannot lift it. But if he cannot lift it, he isn't omnipotent. And if he cannot create such a rock, then he isn't omnipotent either. No matter how you frame it, the very concept of omnipotence seems to fall apart. While this might sound like a mere philosophical puzzle, the implications are far-reaching. The concept of an omnipotent deity is central to the world's major religions, and any crack in this foundation threatens the entire structure. This paradox is not just a riddle, it's a bombshell. If omnipotence is logically incoherent, then what does that say about the God most people worship? Historically, religious sidestepped this dilemma with various explanations. Thomas Aquinas, one of the most influential theologians in history, argued that omnipotence does not mean God can do the logically impossible. In other words, God cannot create contradictions, such as a square circle or a rock so heavy he cannot lift it. But doesn't this restriction undermine the very idea of being all-powerful? If there are limits, even logical ones, how can omnipotence remain an absolute attribute? Some theologians go further, redefining omnipotence to mean that God can do anything that aligns with his nature. This argument suggests that God is only bound by his own essence, yet it conveniently avoids the deeper question: why would a perfect and infinite being need to follow any rules at all, even self-imposed ones? Critics have pointed out that such redefinitions feel more like theological gymnastics than genuine solutions. The paradox also reveals a potential human flaw in conceptualizing the divine. Could it be that omnipotence is not a reflection of God's true nature, but rather a human construct? Throughout history, humanity has created gods in its image, projecting our desires, fears, and need for control onto an infinite canvas. Omnipotence, as a concept, may simply be the ultimate expression of those projections, a desire for a perfect and infallible being that defies the messy realities of existence. If this is true, then the omnipotence paradox exposes more than just a logical inconsistency. It reveals the limits of human imagination. By attempting to create a flawless concept, we may have invented something that cannot exist within the bounds of logic. This, in turn, raises unsettling questions about the authenticity of the divine narratives upheld by religion. Religious apologists often dismiss the paradox as a trivial or misguided critique, but their refusal to engage deeply with it speaks volumes. If omnipotence collapses under scrutiny, what other aspects of theology might crumble alongside it? Could the attributes of God, omniscience, omnibenevolence, omnipresence, be similarly flawed constructs? The persistence of the omnipotence paradox suggests that the very idea of an all-powerful being might be a conceptual impossibility. It forces us to confront a sobering possibility that the God we've envisioned, one who can defy all limits and contradictions, may not exist at all. Or, at the very least, that our understanding of God is deeply flawed and rooted more in human imagination than divine truth. What's even more fascinating, and perhaps troubling, is the silence that often surrounds this paradox in religious circles. Few sermons, catechisms, or theological discussions dare to approach it. Why? Because admitting even the slightest flaw in the concept of omnipotence risks unraveling millennia of belief systems built on its foundation. The cosmic silence is perhaps the most haunting aspect of humanity's search for God. Across millennia, through prayers, rituals, and acts of desperation, people have called out for divine intervention. Yet, in the most harrowing moments of human history, during genocides, famines, plagues, and wars, the heavens have remained eerily quiet. No divine hand has visibly reached down to stop the suffering. The question echoes: where is God in our darkest moments? Take, for example, the Holocaust. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were systematically murdered in one of history's greatest atrocities. Survivors of the concentration camps described moments of despair so profound that many turned their gaze upward, begging for salvation that never came. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate, famously wrote in his memoir Night about his struggle to reconcile God's silence with the horrors he witnessed. The Holocaust stands as a stark indictment of divine absence, a moment when humanity was left to face the abyss alone. This pattern repeats across history. Where was God during the Rwandan genocide, when over 800,000 people were slaughtered in a mere 100 days? Where was he during the Black Death, which wiped out nearly a third of Europe's population? Or during the Boxing Day tsunami of 2004, which killed over 230,000 people across multiple countries? The common response from believers is that God works in mysterious ways, but does this explanation hold up under scrutiny? The advancement of science has only deepened the mystery of God's silence. Astrophysicists have uncovered astonishing details about the origins of the universe. The Big Bang Theory, the prevailing scientific explanation, describes 8 billion years ago when the universe expanded from an unimaginably dense singularity. The data supporting this theory is compelling. Cosmic microwave background radiation, the measurable expansion of galaxies, and precise mathematical models. Notably, this framework requires no divine intervention. If anything, the sheer vastness and indifference of the universe suggest a cosmos that operates according to natural laws, not divine will. Stars are born and die in violent supernovae. Entire galaxies collide. Black holes devour everything in their reach. These are not the hallmarks of a universe crafted with humanity in mind. Carl Sagan once remarked on the pale blue dot, the photograph of Earth taken from 3.7 billion miles away, as a humbling reminder of our insignificance. If there is a God, why does he seem so detached from the cosmos he supposedly created? This silence becomes even more deafening in light of modern technology. In an age where virtually everyone carries a smartphone capable of recording miracles, no irrefutable evidence of divine intervention has emerged. No miraculous healings, no angelic apparitions, no booming voice from the sky offering guidance or comfort. Instead, we see a world that operates under predictable natural laws, with randomness and chaos accounting for much of what we experience. Believers often argue that God's silence is a test of faith. Yet this argument raises troubling questions. Why would a loving God test humanity through unrelenting pain and suffering? Why allow the innocent to suffer while the wicked prosper? Theologians like C.S. Lewis have suggested that pain is a necessary part of free will and moral growth. But this explanation rings hollow in the face of senseless tragedies. How does a child starving in a famine grow from their suffering? How does a parent mourning the loss of their family in a natural disaster find meaning in their pain? More unsettling still is the possibility that God's silence isn't evidence of his absence, but of his indifference. Could it be that a creator exists, but simply doesn't intervene in the affairs of humanity? This idea aligns with deism, the belief that God set the universe into motion and then withdrew, leaving it to unfold according to its own laws. While this avoids the contradictions of omnipotence and omnibenevolence, it paints a chilling picture of a creator who watches from a distance, unmoved by human suffering. Others propose that God's silence reflects humanity's failure to listen. Mystics and spiritual leaders have long claimed that the divine speaks in subtle ways, through the beauty of nature, the intricacies of mathematics, or the love shared between people. But even this interpretation feels like an evasion, a way to justify the lack of clear, undeniable evidence. If God truly wanted humanity to know him, would he not make himself unmistakably known? The origins of God, as a concept, might not be divine at all. Instead, they could be rooted in humanity's need to make sense of the inexplicable. Long before the emergence of monotheism, ancient civilizations created entire pantheons of gods to explain the natural world and the forces that shape their lives. From the Egyptian sun god Ra to the Norse thunder god Thor, every culture tailored its deities to fit its environment, values, and understanding of the universe. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, gods like Enlil and Ishtar were deeply connected to agriculture, fertility, and war, key concerns for a society dependent on farming and conquest. Similarly, the Greeks anthropomorphized their gods, assigning them human flaws and dramas, which made them relatable, but also reflective of societal values. These gods weren't omnipotent or perfect. They were tools for storytelling and moral lessons, as well as explanations for phenomena like storms, earthquakes, and disease. But as human knowledge grew, the need for such explanations began to shrink. Science and philosophy challenged the divine narratives. Lightning, once seen as Zeus' wrath, was revealed to be an electrical discharge caused by atmospheric conditions. Diseases, previously attributed to curses or divine punishment, were explained by pathogens and poor sanitation. Each revelation chipped away at the authority of these gods, leaving them to fade into mythology. The transition to monotheism marked a significant turning point in humanity's spiritual evolution. Unlike polytheistic systems, which fragmented power among multiple deities, monotheism consolidated it into one all-encompassing entity. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam each proclaimed the existence of a single, omnipotent God who was not just a force of nature but the creator of all things. This God wasn't merely an explanation for natural phenomena, he became the source of morality, justice, and ultimate purpose. However, this shift raises an unsettling question. Was the monotheistic God merely the next iteration in a long line of human inventions? After all, the concept of a singular, all-powerful deity conveniently solved many of the problems that plague polytheistic systems. By attributing all power, knowledge, and goodness to one being, monotheism provided a more cohesive framework for explaining existence. But it also centralized authority, making religion a powerful tool for social and political control. The inconsistencies between monotheistic traditions further complicate the idea of a true God. Christianity describes God as a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, while Islam staunchly rejects this notion, emphasizing God's absolute oneness. Hinduism, often considered polytheistic, also contains monotheistic elements, such as the belief in Brahman as the ultimate reality. Even within a single religion, interpretations of God's nature vary wildly. Some Christians envision a loving, forgiving deity, while others emphasize God's wrath and judgment. If God were real, and if he truly wanted humanity to know him, wouldn't there be a universal consensus on his nature? Instead, each culture and era has molded God to suit its needs. In times of war, God is portrayed as a warrior, leading his people to victory. In times of peace, he is a shepherd, guiding his flock with love and compassion. This malleability suggests that God may be less of an eternal truth and more of a cultural construct, a reflection of humanity's hopes, fears, and aspirations. Consider the psychological aspect of belief. Humans have an innate tendency to seek patterns and assign meaning to random events, a trait that likely evolved as a survival mechanism. In a chaotic and unpredictable world, the idea of an all-powerful God provides comfort and stability. It offers answers to life's biggest questions. Why are we here? What happens after we die? Why do bad things happen? These answers, even if unverifiable, fulfill a deep psychological need. Yet history shows that gods are often replaced as our understanding of the world deepens. The sun, once worshipped as a deity, is now understood as a star. Volcanoes, once thought to be the anger of gods, were explained by tectonic activity. Every time science has uncovered the mechanisms behind a mystery, the gods associated with it have faded away. This pattern begs the ultimate question: is the God of modern monotheism any different? As science continues to unravel the mysteries of the universe, exploring quantum physics, multiverse, and the origins of consciousness, will the need for God diminish further? Or will God simply evolve again, taking on new forms and meanings to fit the gaps in our knowledge? What's most striking is how the concept of God has been wielded as a tool of control. Religious institutions have historically used divine authority to justify wars, enforce laws, and maintain social hierarchies. The divine right theory of kingship, the Crusades, and even modern political movements have all relied on the idea of a God who supports their cause. This suggests that the invention of God wasn't just about explaining the world, it was also about shaping and governing it. The question of God's moral character has haunted religious thought for centuries. Is God truly good, or does he resemble a tyrant more than a benevolent creator? Religious texts often depict acts of divine wrath and retribution that, by modern standards, would be considered cruel or even barbaric. These troubling stories force us to confront a disturbing possibility. that the God worshipped by billions might not align with the principles of love and justice that believers attribute to him. Consider the Bible's account of the Great Flood. In this story, God wipes out nearly all of humanity, men, women, children, and animals, with a massive flood, sparing only Noah and his family. The stated reason? Humanity's wickedness. Yet the punishment is indiscriminate, eradicating not only the guilty, but also innocents, including children too young to comprehend morality. A similar pattern emerges in the plagues of Egypt, where God unleashes suffering on an entire nation, culminating in the death of every firstborn child, regardless of their personal culpability. The Quran, too, describes harsh divine punishments. Disobedience to God is met with eternal torment in the afterlife, a fate reserved for both moral failings and mere disbelief. These portrayals depict a deity whose justice is absolute, but also unforgiving, prioritizing obedience over compassion. This brings us to the heart of the issue. How do we reconcile these actions with the idea of a benevolent God? Apologists often argue that divine justice operates on a higher plane, beyond human understanding. They claim that God's actions, no matter how severe they appear, are ultimately righteous because they serve his greater plan. But this reasoning raises an uncomfortable question. Does morality itself depend entirely on divine decree? If so, does that make it inherently arbitrary? For instance, if God commands the destruction of a city, as in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, is that act moral simply because God wills it? Or does it violate the very principles of justice and mercy that religions claim God embodies? The philosopher Euthyphro posed a similar dilemma centuries ago. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? If the former is true, then morality becomes subjective, dictated solely by divine whim. If the latter is true, then morality exists independently of God, undermining his claim to be the ultimate moral authority. The moral contradictions become even starker when we consider the demands for worship and obedience found in religious texts. God is often depicted as requiring absolute devotion, punishing those who stray with eternal damnation or catastrophic events. To skeptics, this resembles the behavior of a tyrant, a ruler who demands loyalty not through love, but through fear. In the Old Testament, for example, the Ten Commandments begin with an assertion of authority. I am the Lord your God, ye shall have no other gods before me. This demand for exclusive worship is accompanied by threats of punishment for idolatry, extending even to future generations. Similarly, in the Quran, the greatest sin is shirk, associating partners with Allah. This unforgivable offense ensures eternal damnation. These passages suggest that God's primary concern is not the well-being of his creation, but the preservation of his own authority. Some historians and anthropologists argue that this portrayal of God reflects the human societies that created these texts. In ancient times, kings and emperors ruled with absolute power, demanding loyalty and punishing dissent. It is no coincidence, they argue, that the God of these texts exhibits similar traits, serving as a divine parallel to earthly rulers. By framing obedience as a moral imperative, religious systems could enforce social cohesion and control. Even more troubling is the persistence of suffering in the world. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why does he allow atrocities like genocides, famines, and natural disasters? Believers often assert that suffering serves a greater purpose, such as testing faith or fostering spiritual growth. But this explanation falters when confronted with the sheer scale of human misery. What purpose is served by the death of a child in a war zone? What lesson is learned by the victims of a devastating earthquake? Skeptics suggest that these inconsistencies point to a man-made origin for the concept of God. They argue that the God of religious texts was designed not to embody perfect morality, but to instill fear, demand obedience, and justify authority. In this framework, divine morality becomes a tool for control, rather than a reflection of universal truths. Yet, this interpretation does not sit easily with believers who see God as a source of love and hope. They argue that the harshness of religious texts reflects the cultural context of their time, not the true nature of the divine. But this raises another question. If these texts are flawed reflections of God's will, how can we trust them to reveal His nature at all? The notion that religion, and by extension, the idea of God, could be part of a grand design for control, is not as far-fetched as it might initially seem. History is littered with examples of religious institutions and leaders using faith as a means to consolidate power, justify conquest, and manipulate the masses. This pattern raises the unsettling question: is belief in God a genuine pursuit of spiritual truth, or a carefully crafted tool for domination? Take the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages as a prime example. By selling indulgences, payments for the forgiveness of sins, it transformed salvation into a lucrative business. This practice reached its peak in the 16th century, when the Church used indulgence funds to finance grand projects like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The blatant monetization of faith led to widespread corruption and ultimately fueled the Protestant Reformation. But indulgences were just one part of a larger system. The Church wielded tremendous influence over kings and commoners alike, positioning itself as the gatekeeper to heaven and the arbiter of moral authority. The pattern is clear: religion has often been a convenient vehicle for those in power to enforce their will. By tying governance to divine authority, rulers could demand unquestioning loyalty. After all, to oppose the king or emperor was to oppose God Himself, a dangerous position in any theocratic system. Modern examples are no less damning. Televangelists, for instance, have turned faith into a billion-dollar industry, using emotional appeals and promises of divine blessings to extract donations from vulnerable believers. Figures like Jim Bakker and Kenneth Copeland have faced scandals for their extravagant lifestyles, funded by the very people they claim to shepherd. Megachurches in the United States operate like corporations, with some leaders amassing fortunes that rival those of CEOs. This intertwining of religion and wealth extends to politics. Religious organizations often align themselves with political powers to influence legislation and public policy. From evangelical leaders shaping elections in the U.S. to state-endorsed religions in countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, the line between faith and governance becomes increasingly blurred. The result? A system where religious doctrine becomes a tool to enforce social norms, suppress dissent, and maintain the status quo. Historical records reveal countless examples of religion being weaponized. The Crusades, initiated under the pretext of reclaiming the Holy Land, were as much about politics and economic gain as they were about faith. Inquisition courts in Europe used religion as an excuse to torture and execute those deemed heretics, consolidating power through fear. Even Gandhi's nonviolent resistance, while rooted in spirituality, arose in part as a counter to British colonialism that often justified its rule through a divine mission to civilize. But could the concept of God itself be the ultimate tool of control? Belief in a higher power inherently creates a dynamic of submission. If God is omnipotent, omniscient, and infallible, then obedience becomes not just advisable, but mandatory. This idea can be, and has been, manipulated to ensure compliance. Promises of heaven and threats of hell serve as powerful motivators, encouraging adherence to religious rules and deterring rebellion. Even the structure of many religious doctrines mirrors systems of governance. In Christianity, for example, the hierarchy of God, clergy, and laity closely resembles monarchic rule. The Ten Commandments and other religious laws serve as divine legislation, with clergy acting as the intermediaries between the people and their celestial ruler. This structure ensures a centralization of power that can be exploited by those in charge. One of the most striking examples of this manipulation lies in the concept of divine right. Monarchs throughout history claimed their authority was granted directly by God, making their rule unquestionable. This doctrine wasn't about spirituality, it was about cementing political power. By tying their leadership to the will of an almighty being, kings and queens effectively made their positions invulnerable to human critique. The conspiracy, if it exists, isn't necessarily orchestrated by shadowy figures in secret chambers. It's baked into the very fabric of organized religion. Over centuries, religious institutions have developed systems that exploit humanity's innate desire for meaning, community, and protection. By positioning themselves as the custodians of divine truth, these institutions gain unparalleled influence over the hearts and minds of their followers. Does this mean that all belief in God is a scam? Not necessarily. For many, faith provides genuine comfort, guidance, and a sense of purpose. But the historical and ongoing abuses of religion suggest that the concept of God has been repeatedly co-opted for less noble purposes. Whether by emperors, popes, or televangelists, the divine has often been wielded as a means to accumulate power, wealth, and control. Even in a universe where God might not exist, life remains as vibrant, profound, and meaningful as ever. In fact, some would argue that the absence of divine oversight isn't a void to be feared, but an opportunity to be embraced. Without a celestial architect dictating our purpose, humanity gains something extraordinary: the freedom to define its own path. A godless universe doesn't strip the colors from a sunset, the thrill from discovery, or the warmth from human connection. It doesn't rob us of awe as we gaze up at the stars, knowing we are part of something vast and ancient. Instead, it challenges us to see these moments for what they are, beautiful in their impermanence and made more precious by their fleeting nature. Without divine rules, we become the authors of our morality. Kindness, empathy, and justice aren't mandates handed down from above. They are choices we make to improve the human experience. This freedom is both a burden and a gift, urging us to take responsibility for our actions, our communities, and our planet. Far from making life meaningless, a universe without God invites us to create meaning for ourselves. It's an open canvas, waiting for us to paint our stories, explore our potential, and leave behind a legacy that reflects the best of what humanity can be. We are the architects of our destiny, the stewards of our world, and the dreamers of tomorrow. So the question isn't whether we need God to find meaning, it's whether the pursuit of God has distracted us from discovering the truth about ourselves. In our search for the divine, have we overlooked the profound power we already hold within us? Thank you for joining us on this journey, for asking difficult questions, and for daring to explore the possibilities of a universe filled with wonder, even if it is silent. Your time, curiosity, and open mind are what make discussions like this possible. Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, the search for meaning begins with you.